welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, broadcast out of beautiful Monticello, Maine, in Aroostook County in northern Maine. And I just returned there from a very successful trip, I like to think. I was accompanied by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Punamatula Kishore. We conducted 5 presentations on Agenda 21. The first one was last Thursday in Waldoboro, Maine. That's really where Dr. Kishore has set up his National Library of Health and Healing. And we had a nice turnout, a lot of young people there. And then we went up to Aroostook County, actually first Lincoln, Maine, and we had a state rep that was in attendance. In fact, he was the one that actually hosted the meeting at the local American Legion. And then we went up to Holton, Maine, which is where Route 95 ends or begins, depending on where you're from. And then up to Presque Isle, Maine. And we also went up to Fort Kent to visit some friends and get a chance to reacquaint ourselves with some folk we haven't seen in a while. Then I got a call on Saturday night. There's a lady that lives in the town of Medway, Maine, which is just it's about 80 miles south or so from Presque Isle. And she heard about the presentations and would like to know if I could do one on Sunday. So I said, sure, absolutely. And we actually had a nice turnout for a meeting that only had a few hours to prepare, and was very grateful. The video that I did, one of the videos, one of the presentations was videotaped. The one we did in Waldoboro came out pretty good, and that's up on the Camp Constitution's YouTube channel. And as a result of the presentations, I've got 3 invitations to return back to give similar presentations. I did a little video clip of the effects of NAFTA and Agenda 21 in a mill town. That would be the town of Millinocket, Maine, which used to be a very vibrant town. It was set up as a mill town 100 years ago. And the 2 mills closed. The population at its height was about 8,000. It's probably under 4,000 now. Half the businesses are closed. And guess what? They want to put a federal park in that area. So anyway, it's worth looking at. Anyway, our guest just called in, Sheri Few of USPIE, United States Parents Involved in Education. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you this morning?
I'm just fine, thank you. I really appreciate you calling in, and I really want to give your organization as much attention as possible. We're a homeschooling family here, and so we've been well aware of the problems of government-controlled education for many, many years. And on our website, which I promote all the time, is the Sam Blumenfeld Archives, and I hope that your organization will share it with its members. And by the way, we have a lot of common friends. Michael Jandre from Massachusetts, I'll be seeing Mike in a few hours. But I also note on your national board of directors or advisors, you have Dr. Duke Pesta, who's a good friend, and we sponsored him last fall to come up to the Boston area and New Hampshire, and also Alex Newman. So if you get those 2 guys, you know it's a great organization.
Well, we are honored to have Michael Gendre involved with our work. In fact, he's our state chapter president for Massachusetts. And, of course, Duke Pesta and Alex Newman are brilliant, very knowledgeable men in this area of government schools, which we're about to talk about.
Well, tell us about your organization and maybe what got you involved. When I speak, we do a lot of homeschool shows, and I like to ask people what promoted you to homeschool. So what got you involved in this and, founding this organization?
Okay. Well, actually, it started out in my state of South Carolina. I founded South Carolina Parents Involved in Education back in the year 2000. And it was because of some insidious health and safety standards that they were being imposed on children. My children were all in public school, and we were offended by what they were proposing to teach. So that's how the organization got started. And then back around 2010, we began fighting the Common Core standards in South Carolina. And I'm sure you're familiar with that mess. I know a better word to
absolutely.
describe it. But
and that was when it was first revealed or unfolded in 2010.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that was the year that many states were bribed into adopting the standards for Race to the Top money, and that's exactly what happened.
They bribe people with the taxpayers' money. It's amazing.
That's correct. As
bad as it is, it's the same thing with Agenda 21. It was interesting too because the two of them sort of interlock. This idea of sustainable education, sustainable development, they very much interlock.
I agree.
What exactly are the beliefs and principles of the organization? What issues are you working on at this point?
Well, like I said, it started out as a South Carolina group, and then when I spoke to colleagues around the country, people like Michael who were fighting the Common Core standards in Massachusetts, we decided we would band together, become a national organization, and our primary mission is to end the U.S. Department of Education and all federal education mandates. Because we realized, the same thing was happening all around the country. We were fighting to have better standards or standards rewritten, only to have the Common Core standards rebranded and put out under a different name. So we recognized that the true culprit was the federal government and their involvement, their unconstitutional involvement in state and local education, and the way they enforce what it is, the control over the schools is through mandatory testing. And so we recognize the need to cut off the snake's head, if you will, and go straight for the culprit, and that is the U.S. Department of Education and federal education mandates. So that's our primary mission. And this week, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think for the listeners, a lot of the listeners, most of them probably share our worldview, but for those who might be new to the show, give a little background on this thing called the Department of Public Education, because I don't see it anywhere in my Constitution. I'm sure it's not in your copy of the Constitution. So how did this beast came into existence?
Well, it started back in 1980 through legislation, and it was under the first President Bush. So they instituted the U.S. Department of Education. Their budget was about $5 million. And since that time, it has grown astronomically, and now their budget is over $70 billion. They employ nearly 5,000 top salary individuals. And again, it's our money, our taxpayer dollars that's funding all of this, and then they use that very money to control what's happening in the local classrooms because they threaten to withhold the money if we don't comply, if we don't. And primarily with testing, that's the way that they control what's happening, is that we have to submit our state plans, and it's all linked to testing and to the Common Core standards. And they're not called Common Core anymore. Now they're, in most states, they're called College and Career Ready Standards. But it hasn't been that long ago that it was even instituted, and it certainly needs to be eradicated soon.
What's interesting is that when something becomes controversial, like Common Core, and Common Core it's not just conservative type Christians, but there's a lot of people on the left that don't like Common Core. As Duke Pester promoted, one of his presentations, he's almost quoting verbatim from various leftists around the country. And so when something becomes controversial, it's usually rebranded. I know, for example, and Peg Lutzik writes about this. She's also one of your advisors. This visionary session, they were called the Delphi technique, and that sounds kind of evil, so let's call it a visionary session. And then when visionary sessions became controversial, now they're called charrettes, but it's the same thing, the same exact thing, just rebranded. Just like Agenda 21 has been rebranded Agenda 2030 or Vision 2030 or something to that nature. Now you have people chapters around the country.
That's correct. We have about 30 state chapters established, and we have presidents and then groups working underneath of them. So we're really pleased with the work we've done as far as building infrastructure. We've only been in existence a couple of years, and we're really starting to gain some momentum. we actually put out a position statement this week, and that's what I had hoped to talk to you about today.
Oh, sure, absolutely, yes. I actually have a copy of it right in my hand. Would you like to read it or just talk about it?
Well, I'll just talk about it.
Okay.
And so, when Betsy DeVos was appointed to the position of Secretary of Education over U.S. Department of Education, that was very controversial because she's been a proponent of school choice and very active, and her husband and she, who are billionaires, had put lots of money into school choice around the country. Now, she was also controversial in some of our circles because she was also a proponent of Common Core. So there were a lot of people who had fought the Common Core standards who were not thrilled about the nomination. However, we tried to think and give her the benefit of the doubt. But since school choice is her issue, and she's added extra money to the budget this year to expand school choice, expanding charter schools and other types of school choice options, we thought it was very important to have this discussion about school choice because for decades, conservatives and Republicans have been pushing for school choice as the solution to education problems. The concept behind it is very valid. Having competition enter the education market will breed excellence, and it should bring down the cost. And so competition is a great free market concept. However, the problem with the choice as it's designed today is that it still has the federal government calling the shots. Right. So we say that if school choice means a parent only gets to choose which Common Core school their child attends, then that's not really choice at all. So we are proposing through our position statement that we even rename this concept and name it more appropriately parental choice and curriculum choice, because parents obviously, I know you and I agree, are the primary authority over their children's education. And we've been taken out of the equation. So we think it's better focused on the parents, parental choice, and curriculum choice. And we also are suggesting that the current choice options that are out there, whether it's charter schools, vouchers, education savings accounts, all of those are a step in the right direction, but the only one that's unfettered by government control is tax credits. So we would support tax credits, especially an increase in the federal tax credit as an option for parents who don't choose government schools. But that's really the only school choice we promote or defend, because the others are all linked to the mandatory federal testing. And as long as they are, then it's no choice at all. So that's kind of in a nutshell what our position statement is, and we're hoping that conservatives all around the country will begin talking about this and recognizing that school choice is not the solution by itself. We must get rid of the federal control first, and that's our mission.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you had those comments about our new Betsy DeVos. That a lot of people ask me, what do you think about our new Department of Education director? And I said, well, she's probably would be an improvement over anyone that Hillary Clinton would have nominated. But the bottom line is that if she were a true constitutionalist, she would simply auction off all of the resources to the highest bidder, turn in her auction mallet, and resign the position and lay everybody off because it doesn't have a right to exist. And I think that's the problem. A lot of people, there are a lot of conservatives who really aren't constitutionalists, or they somehow think that the federal government has a role in education because, when I do we do a little 10-question quiz. Well, that's one of the questions. And most people think that it's either the president or Congress that's supposed to control education. And I point out to them that it's not in the Constitution. And I kind of let them answer the question. So if it's not a power delegated to the federal government, then whose job is it? And then they think, well, I didn't know that. Well, of course you didn't know that, because most people don't know that. So they think it was always that way. Just like compulsory education laws. I mean, they started here in Massachusetts in the early 1850s. It was motivated by a man named Horace Mann. I was just in the town of his birthplace in Franklin, Massachusetts. The guy goes to Prussia, comes back and says, I've seen the future. let's do it here. And it took a number of decades and a few years after the Civil War, but every single person complies, and they think, wasn't it always this way? We were just a generation and a half from the founding of our nation, and we agreed, we started agreeing to let the state raise our children and put them in mandatory institutions for so many hours a day and so many days a week. It was just preposterous, but it's been always that way. So I think it's great that we get this discussion that the federal government Department of Education has no constitutional legitimacy. And we take it from there. We don't have to compromise and say, well, maybe if we don't give them as much power, that needs to be abolished. And that was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan ran in 1980. That was on his platform. And he failed it. And he could have easily have done that. You don't need congressional approval. You just simply abolish it with an executive order. And it's done. I believe there's a bill. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say I'm glad to hear your knowledge of the history of education, because you're right, so few really understand how it got started in our country. And, the early post-secondary institutions, now what we call Ivy League schools, were all Christian schools.
That's right.
Yale was a Christian school.
Dartmouth.
And they were started for the purpose of training pastors. And once the Bible, once the printing press actually was created, then everybody had their own copy of the scriptures, and so then it was important for them to learn how to read. So that's kind of where the compulsory education drive came from originally. And you're absolutely right. And more people, I always like to say this one good thing about Common Core is at least it did cause parents and taxpayers to really wake up to the scheme that's happening. Yes. So that was one bright spot with Common Core. And even people that don't understand Common Core, or maybe they don't have kids in school, so they don't think, it affects them, I say that we are all stakeholders because, first of all, it is our tax dollars, and it is a large amount of money that we are dumping into the federal education scheme. So we are all stakeholders, and beyond our money being used, and now the other part that makes us a stakeholder is it's being used to indoctrinate young minds against the very principles that we believe in. And when I say we, as proud Americans, as freedom-loving, free market individuals, and what's being taught in government schools is contrary to the things we believe. And that's why we shouldn't be surprised when the majority of young people wanted Bernie Sanders, a self-professed socialist, as their president, because they've been taught that socialism is a good thing, and even communism is to be lauded. And that's exactly what they're being taught in government schools.
Well, according to one of the stats I've seen, 80% of people under 30, registered voters under 30, either voted for Hillary or Bernie. And that's deeply troubling because then how is the next election going to play out? Unless we older folks just decide not to die, we better start getting some of these young minds converted, because we're going to be in deep trouble. The only kind of people that will be elected will be people like Bernie and Hillary, and it will be the death knell of our once great republic, if that's the case. And you're absolutely right, whether you have children or not. I mean, when you go down to the local convenience store and that young person can't make change, or they can't read cursive, or their moral character is reprehensible due to the way they were brought up, due to the values that were, or lack of values that are promoted in these government-controlled schools, you're affected by it. You definitely are a stakeholder, and you're paying for it. Whether you're a single confirmed bachelor or you have 25 kids, you're paying for it, and you're going to suffer the consequences if you don't take action. And that's why your organization is so important. And now, isn't there a bill currently in Congress that calls for the abolition of the Department of Education?
Yes, there is. There's a bill that was sponsored by Representative Massey from Kentucky, and it's a very simple bill. It actually is just a statement, and it says that we'll close the U.S. Department of Education in 2018. So Representative Massey has started this, and we're pleased about his bill, and we support it. And we've been encouraging congressmen and women around the country to sign on to his bill. And we have a trip planned for our leadership team in October, where we're going to be meeting with several legislators that are on the Education Committee. And Representative Massey has publicly said that he really doesn't expect the bill to pass, but he believes it is a good place to start the conversation. He understands what needs to happen. And so one of the things that we'll be asking for in our meetings when we go to D.C. in October is for hearings. We want expert testimony on this issue so that the public discussion will begin and people will become aware of all the things that you and I are discussing, of how it's unconstitutional, of the need to return local control to not just states but communities and parents. And so we're excited about our trip to D.C. We're also going to be meeting with some of Secretary DeVos's staff, and we're really hoping that things like we're doing through this, we're calling it a radio campaign, where we're on talk radio all across the country this week, and we put out a press release with our school choice statement. We're hoping that that's going to create dialogue, and especially we work heavily in social media to try to put pressure on Congress to fulfill our mission, which again is to end the Department of Ed and all federal education mandates.
I think you're right, though, about anything. This issue is not articulated the way it should be, not to reform, but to abolish. And what may seem impossible today becomes policy tomorrow. Just look at how the other side, the opposition, who in their right mind was advocating men marrying men 20 or 30 years ago. It was only in very small circles, and the thought that even most liberals thought it was ridiculous. Now today, if you don't accept it, there's something wrong with you. You're some kind of evil fanatic, right-wing fanatic or something like that. So these ideas that seem preposterous today become policy tomorrow, and for good or for bad. And I think it's important that we do articulate this. And I'm glad to hear that you're doing the radio show circuit. That's something that I've been advocating for the longest time. That we abolish the Department of Education. It was interesting. Maybe you could put. I'll give you reference to this. I can photocopy it. I think I actually have it in a PDF version. 1941. The U.S. government, under the Roosevelt administration, published a book. It was to the 150th anniversary of the Constitution, although it was a few years later it was published. And in the book, which is probably about 900, 800 pages, it had a little questions and answers on the Constitution. And they asked the question, what role does the federal government have in education? I point out to people, no, this is a New Deal liberal Democrat administration that published this. Roosevelt had a letter, commending the work of this committee and the book and so forth. And the answer was none. So to me, that would be my testimony. I'm simply, all of you Democrats out there, Roosevelt was right. This book is right. And somewhere along the line, we got a little off track here. So if nothing else, this should be the source document, say, hey, we shouldn't be involved in this.
Well, the other, and that's very interesting. I made a couple of notes ahead of that, and it's always good when we can find, quotes from the left or liberals that support the same things we do, and Common Core has become sort of a bipartisan issue, thankfully. And we have there have been surveys that have been done too across the political spectrum, and 80% of those polled agree that we should have local control. They support local control. And so that's where it is a nonpartisan issue, although, I'm an unashamed conservative myself personally, and everything that I do, I'm motivated to do because of my faith. We recognize that there are people on the other side of the aisle that agree with us, and obviously we're going to need them to accomplish our goals. So,
absolutely, yeah.
It's always good to find common ground. And then our mission isn't a brand new one. People like you have been talking about ending the Department of Ed. You pointed out that Ronald Reagan ran on it, and unfortunately was not successful in achieving that. Certainly would have been a lot easier in the 80s than it will be today. And the reason it's going to be such a challenge today is because education has become a huge money-making industry. there is a lot of profiteering that is happening amongst the textbook companies, the
absolutely
technology companies.
Who is the Englishman who controls most of the textbooks in the world, in the United States? I know Duke Pesta pointed his name. Pearson, that's right. Pearson. Publishing. Mm-hmm. And even some of the little well-established publishing arms that you think are, mom and pop publishing company, 5 generations, there's a good chance that Pearson bought them out. They just keep the name.
Right.
It's incredible. It's incredible. And even the problem too is that some of the homeschool curriculum has been Common Core approved. And I know Bill Gates was very busy buying denominations, and there was a church, a Lutheran church, a conservative Lutheran church. There's a lot of very liberal ones, and we used to use their place near Albany, New York, as a meeting room, and we were doing a follow-up on Common Core with Duke Pesta's presentation. He had about 800 people out there a few years ago, and the local people says, "Well, what's the presentation? It's going to be on Common Core." "Oh, are you against it?" "Oh, sure we are." "Well, you can't be here. You can't do it." "Why?" "Because our school promotes, uses Common Core." And you've got to be kidding. And you do a little research and find out, Bill Gates has been busy, promoting his, and these are, so a lot of these, and I was at a homeschool show. It was kind of interesting. I had a table, and Duke Pesta and the Freedom Project had a table. And Duke probably didn't know that Bob Jones University had a table, or wasn't even giving any thought. And he said, you got to watch out, because some of their stuff is Common Core compliant. And anyway, some angry parents went right to the Bob Jones University table, and one of the guy runs the vendors, he thought I had something to do with it. I said, no, I said, it wasn't me, I said, but if the and the poor lady behind the table, she had no idea what's going on, and these angry parents said, not her fault. And, they said, hey, sure enough, that's what they've done. So you've got to be careful. Now, Duke told me that there are some books, they'll put the term Common Core compliant or whatever just for the sake of putting it on there, not necessarily that it is. So, you have to be careful about those kinds of things. But that's why I say use an older textbook, and there's plenty of them out there. You don't have to get something that's so-called Common Core compliant. Let's see, I think we just got a few minutes left. And let me check my time. That's 30 minutes, goes by awfully quick. Yeah, we got 2 minutes left. How can people get a hold of your organization? Phone numbers, websites?
Yes, I appreciate you bringing that up. We would love for people to what we call join the movement, and that's the movement to stop Fed Ed, by going to our website, and that's USPIE.org. And that's the acronym for United States Parents Involved in Education. So if they'll go to our website. Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, that's not 3.14, is it? It's PIE.
PIE, that's correct.
Yeah.
So go to our website and join the movement. And when you join the movement, then that will put you in touch with, we'll connect you with the state president in Massachusetts, which we discussed, is Michael Gendry. And we'll get them involved with what's happening in Massachusetts, and they'll receive weekly updates. We do blogs regularly, and that way they can be in the loop, and they can help us to create the groundswell, which is going to be necessary to make this happen.
And let's see. So also, if people want to help you financially, they can just go to your website and make a donation that way?
Absolutely. Yes.
We love people who donate to organizations like ours. Also, do I have permission to link your organization to our website, campconstitution.net?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
We would be grateful
that's what we'll do.
for that.
Okay. Well, all right. Very good. Well, thank you for being a guest, and you've been listening to Camp Constitution Radio on WBCQ The Planet. And until next week, God bless. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.